Four areas that I look at, especially when someone's describing having difficulty responding to stressors, is I'm looking at where's their mind, what are their thoughts, what's the mental aspect, also what are they doing physically, are they eating well, are they sleeping well, so I'm looking at the physical sort of resiliency, are they exercising, how are they treating their bodies, so mental, physical. I also look at their relationships.
Well, good evening, Sasebo. Good evening, 7th Fleet. This is Chaplain Lawrence again with this week's episode of Taps with Chaps. Today we're continuing our conversation on resiliency, and we have an expert in the field of resiliency who I want to welcome to the show today. This is Lieutenant Nathan Moon, who's one of our psychologists here at the clinic in Sasebo. So welcome, Dr. Moon. And tell us first just a little bit about yourself. What's your background? How long have you been in the Navy? What's your field of specialty? And what kind of led you to that field of specialty?
Okay, yeah. So let's see, long story short, I was actually prior Army enlisted, National Guard, working as a diesel mechanic, and then ended up learning some language and transferred over to be a linguist in the military. And I was doing that to help me get through school. The whole point was so I could pay for school, but as I was working for the Army National Guard and going to school, I was interested in psychology and ended up deploying to Afghanistan. And it was there that I really got turned on to military psychology because of the many challenges that that I faced and that those around me faced. One of the things that really stood out to me was how volatile relationships were during deployment. I was actually talking to somebody just recently about some of my experience, and we had, I ended up working in an intel shop, an aviation intel shop, and we had 5 enlisted and 1 officer of our shop, and of those, 1 was single, 3 of us maintained relationships, and there was 2 divorces. And I felt like that sort of replicated when I ventured out to the operations center and other areas. There was just a lot of relationship issues. And so I got kind of turned on to, what were some of the challenges that we faced? Was it different because we're National Guard? Was it different because we were out there for so long? So when I finished my bachelor's degree, I looked at further education, and I actually went and got a degree in marriage and family therapy, hoping to do some couples and marriage and family work. And it was during that time that some of the more advanced opportunities like assessment and things like that became interest to me as well. And so I continued with the same school, and I finished a doctorate there as well. I got a doctorate in psychology. But as far as my training after that, I worked at a lot of different VAs, a few different other counseling sites, worked at first for a Union Rescue Mission on Skid Row in Los Angeles that really helped me get an idea of some of the challenges that poverty entails. And then worked for Sports Concussion Institute, focused on TBIs and concussions, especially among our young athletes, which I felt like also mirrored a lot of the personnel that I'd be working with in the military. Worked at the VA in Los Angeles with geriatrics there, as well as neuropsychology, and then went to the Utah Salt Lake VA to get my internship done. So I spent a year there, went and did a postdoctoral training in New Mexico at the VA in Albuquerque. Focused on PTSD and trauma for that year, as well as some couples work, which was really important at that time, and it continues to be. So after that, I took a job for the VA, lived in Mobile, Alabama for a short time. The Navy ended up picking me up as a direct ascension from there. And so my first duty station was Beaufort, South Carolina. I was there for a little under 3 years, about 2.5 years. And now here I am in Sasebo. Been here now for over 2 years.
Wonderful, and we're glad that you're here. So our conversation is really centered around resiliency, and how would you define resiliency? What does that look like through the lens of psychology?
Yeah, I think like the definitions I hear most often are the most simple are just the ability to bounce back after whatever stressor or whatever life throws at us. But from a more technical kind of standpoint, I look at four main areas that bolsters our resiliency. And so the four areas that I look at, especially when someone's describing having difficulty responding to stressors, is I'm looking at where's their mind, what are their thoughts, what's the mental aspect, also what are they doing physically. Are they eating well? Are they sleeping well? So I'm looking at the physical sort of resiliency. Are they exercising? How are they treating their bodies? So mental, physical. I also look at their relationships. I think that's one of the big challenges being in a forward deployed location or in an isolative environment that we are kind of in, is relationships are either detached because of the separation that occurs. And it's sometimes difficult. There's a lot of different ways that people isolate themselves. For instance, if I'm a single officer, I have a lot less opportunities or to interact with people of my similar rank and situation. If I am there's so many different ways of isolating. If I'm just a very high-ranking individual, then because of fraternization concerns, things like that, I again have some limitations on my social life. So, and then if I'm a junior and enlisted, then chances are I'm not here with a family. And so all of my social world is people that I meet here, and I didn't bring anyone over. So those long-term relationships are harder to come by. And then also just the difficulty with travel right now, especially with the COVID-19 travel restrictions and the PHO, there's a lot less opportunity to see my family. And so that one is a particular interest while I've been working out here. And then the fourth of which area of resiliency, so I went through mental, physical, relationships, and the last one is values. How am I living according to what matters to me? And if I can't identify what matters to me, that's an area for growth.
Yeah, I think that's great. You zeroed in on some of the most important things that certainly I see a lot, and I'm sure you see a lot, that these come up time and time again. Sleep. It's like we hear about sleep issues all the time. And so those share. I think they're common throughout the entire Navy, whether you're dependent or you're active duty or junior enlisted or senior enlisted. Those are all great areas for all of us to pay attention to and focus on. And I think you kind of weaved right into my next question, which is, what are some of the really common issues that you do see, and especially in today's environment with COVID-19, how has the resiliency picture changed, and what are some of the new challenges that we see with regards to resiliency now in the world we live in?
Yeah, I think the one that stands out the most, again, goes back to the social aspect and the relationships. I think right off the bat, people were feeling it when we started hearing about social distancing and what that meant. Cutting off relationships or limiting our exposure to other people, even just the lack of physical touch, it can really have a mental impact or a resiliency impact. And so that's probably the most common. And I think there's challenges across the board, but different people are impacted differently. And those that are out here on their own without family, and then directed, and we need to maintain that for our physical health, but directed to have very little contact with people outside of the 10, of the 10 people in 14 days, right? That can be pretty challenging, and it limits the opportunity for social interaction and social support. Now, I know that we've adapted in a lot of ways virtually, and there's a lot of great virtual ways of connecting. There's no suggestion that those aren't effective, but unfortunately, they just aren't quite as. I don't see them making up for the lack of the actual face-to-face contact that we're experiencing with COVID-19.
Sure. And when a sailor or dependent faces a resiliency issue, kind of within the realm that you described, what are the things, the recommendations that you would typically make to kind of build them back up in a particular area that is a challenge for them at this moment?
Yeah, so I think we can all improve in all areas, right? So when someone comes in and maybe they're going through some particular stressor or they're presenting with some sort of difficulty, I start with that assessment and go, okay, and what are you experiencing? What are some of the challenges? And then in my mind, if I'm seeing a deficit in one or more of those areas, I think about particular interventions or things that can be helpful. We have a lot of resources here, even though they might be limited in numbers. We have quite a range of scope. We've got Chaplain, we've got mental health, we've got Fleet and Family Services, we've got NWR, we have the OAC, the outdoor, what does it stand for?
Outdoor Activity Center.
Activity Center, yeah. We've got the Liberty Center, we've got the USO. We have so many different ways of supporting resiliency. And so after the assessment, I think, okay, in what particular resource may be of most benefit? And when I'm thinking about my particular role, I'm a primary resource for that mental resilience. If there are just patterns of thought, ways of thinking and believing that may be causing challenges. So for instance, if I'm working with someone and they see a lot of negative things about themselves and their view and their outlook in life is really low, and yet they're sleeping okay, they're protecting their sleep, they're doing their best eating wise, but that's a particular challenge, then I'm going to offer individual therapy with me, and there may be some other opportunities, group therapies. We've also got other mental health providers, and so getting them connected for Fleet and Family Services. Dr. West is our IBHC, and she helps out a lot with resiliency in that realm as well.
And what's IBHC for our viewers?
IBHC, let me clarify. So our IBHC stands for Integrated Behavioral Health Care, or Behavioral Counselor. And she works right in line with our primary care providers. So if someone were to go to a primary care provider today, and maybe they're feeling ill, but then they also complain of a lot of stress lately, or maybe they've got some chronic pain, or they want to quit smoking, or they're having some sleep issues, their first stop might be that integrated behavioral health care specialist who might be available at that time of the appointment, so you don't have to go anywhere or do anything else, and you just have an opportunity to talk with her and maybe set up a plan with her at that point for a future contact, or schedule a time to come back and meet with her. But she's oftentimes that initial contact when it comes to mental resilience, because people end up going to their primary care provider, and then we identify something that she might be able to help out with.
Sure. I think you make a great point, which is we do have a lot of resources in Sasebo, and even though sometimes I think we can look at Sasebo or any other command that's in the region as small, there's usually a lot there, though, that maybe people aren't tuned into. And so often, I suspect it's probably true for you as it is for me, it's getting people to ask for help or to come and seek somebody out. Sometimes that's the hardest step that they're taking or that they need to take.
I'd say it's probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest, is just to make that initial ask, because in order to do so, I have to acknowledge that I'm not doing well on my own. And we have this strange thing in our society where we expect everyone to be doing well on their own. And I tell you what, I wouldn't be doing well on my own. I appreciate having a relationship with Chaplain. I appreciate having a relationship with coworkers and other providers and other friends and family and things like that. And the idea that we can make it on our own, it doesn't seem to, replicate in reality.
And I think we're really lucky here with our base CEO, Captain Stallings, and I think a lot of commands are really the same, where he has said time and again, it's not weakness to ask for help. In fact, it's a strength to say there are areas of my life that I'm struggling with right now that I need some extra help with. Maybe somebody to listen to, bounce ideas off of, look for resources, and make myself better. I mean, that's kind of a life mission of all of us, is making ourselves better than we are right now. And sometimes another person can help us do that in a way and manner that I wasn't even aware of. And even as providers, as chaplains, sometimes I think, we ask for help and we're like, hey, somebody thought of something I didn't think of, and expanded my own worldview, so to speak. So I think, having the attitude of asking for help is okay. When we need it, ask for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so normal, and yet to do it individually, it can be so challenging. Yeah. Let me also clarify. I did mention that there are a lot of resources. I want to reiterate. There are a lot of variety of resources, and sometimes it's really hard to access the ones that we're wanting at that time, right? We are a forward deployed location, yep. And so sometimes it is challenging to get what we want right at the time, even though the organization is there. I've witnessed that a lot with COVID-19 because there was kind of a fluctuation in the demand. I think with the USO couldn't maintain, couldn't be open initially, and so they might have been able to do some things virtually or by distance, but it's hard to gain access to that that we're used to. We're used to being able to go in and talk with people in that location and rest. Same with Fleet and Family Services. Same with the clinic. At some point, we had to reduce our face-to-face contact, and we transitioned to a more virtual. But that was in that initial period. It was challenging, and that process of changing over limited our opportunities to provide all the care that could potentially be given. And so we do have a lot of variety of resources, and sometimes it can feel limited just based on the demand and some of the transitions that we're facing. While we're talking about that, I want to mention that there's so many resources that I couldn't even list them all now, but I will list a few additional ones that oftentimes get overlooked. Military OneSource is a fantastic resource for getting some virtual counseling. That can be as something as challenging as, hey, I received some bad news at work, maybe a reprimand or a low evaluation or something like that, and I'm just feeling cruddy. I want to talk to somebody. That might be a good place to start. There's also Give an Hour. There's numerous providers across the nation that are willing to provide services at a free cost. They give an hour a week type of thing, and so when they have that availability, they can see you and set you up for an extended course of treatment, just depending on your needs. So those are two of the ones that often get overlooked, but there's many organizations out there that are willing and able to provide services, but just it's hard to track all of them.
Sure. But it's always good to ask, if you're not sure where to go, there's always people that you can ask, say, hey, I'm looking for this, where can I go to get help, or what's available to me? And whether that's at the clinic or at Fleet and Family or the chaplain's office or USO, those places are going to be the kind of the key people that are engaged with all of those resources to connect you. Yeah. But again, asking's it might be the hardest step, but it's maybe the most important step sometimes. So any final words that you want to leave with us, Dr. Moon?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably, because I spend a lot of time in this, I could probably talk a lot, so you have to cut me off at some point.
No, keep going. This is good stuff. This is great.
Okay, so I want to highlight that resilience isn't an action. It isn't something that's done. It's something that we're always needing to do. We foster. It's kind of like growing a vineyard, right? Like when I plant the seeds, I'm not done. Then I've got to go back and I've got to water. Then I've got to go and weed. And then I've got to go and fertilize. And I've got to go and continue to check. And then even once it's fully grown and I feel really resilient, then I've got to continue to trim and I've got to work on it. And it's a constant thing. And we reap the benefits when we least expect it. When we're going through life and then something really terrible happens. And I would love to think that anyone can escape that, but we can't. We all are going to face some pretty significant challenges. That's part of life. And so the benefits of resilience are found when we least expect it, and it's something that we cultivate long term. It's not something that we want to focus on for a while and then stop. It's something that we focus on all the time. So those 4 areas, our relationships, our values, our mental resilience, the way we think, and our physical well-being, those are things that we want to be cognizant of, or thinking about and improving upon all the time, so that when those things happen, then we can respond in a way that will keep us healthy.
That's great, and I 100% agree. And thank you, Lieutenant Moon, for coming and talking to us about this really important topic of resiliency, even more so and perhaps elevated to a point where it hasn't been for some time because of COVID, and for all of us to think and track on. And thank you to all of the sailors, the Marines, the airmen, and the soldiers of 7th Fleet area for all your continued resiliency and your efforts here in Japan and South Korea and Diego Garcia and elsewhere. This is Chaplain Lawrence with another episode of Taps with Chaps in the Bag. Tune in next week, and we will see you then. Take care.